Right side to the 10, to the 5, touchdown! Sit, go into the hoop, puts it up, puts it in! A fantastic play.
Welcome into Magnolia Fields, the podcast episode number 32 from the Richard Schwartz and Associates studio. He's Brad Logan, and I'm Frank Dodds. And an exciting last couple of weeks, really 3 weeks for the Ole Miss. This is the Hotty Toddy edition. The Ole Miss Rebels on the football field, also on the hardwood basketball court. So it's been an exciting time. Brad, tell me a team in this nation who has played better football in the last 3 weeks.
The last 3 weeks, I don't know that anybody has. I think there could be an argument to be made that Alabama possibly is playing better than any team in the SEC. But right now, I think it's Ole Miss. And Texas is playing pretty good football, but Texas doesn't have any top 25 wins. You look at what Ole Miss did this past Saturday, and what Ole Miss is doing is it's putting itself in position for the college football playoff. And really, over the last 3 games, you look back at how well they played against Arkansas, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Prior to that, the last 2 quarters against Oklahoma, Ole Miss is really playing good football.
Our first headline of the night: Rebels win big, and specifically because we have not been in the studio for a couple of weeks. Rebels over the Arkansas on the road, 63-31. They followed the formula that you and I talked about in the last podcast, which is get on them early and take them out of the game.
Yeah. They did that very well.
And then it just coasted to 63 points. And I think they got a lot of playing time for some of the backups, giving up 31 points. That's a little abnormal for this defense.
You just look at the Oklahoma game and the Arkansas game, and Ole Miss 24 sacks over the last 3 games. And that's just an area that this Ole Miss team has not been in program history. Even back in 93 when it had the number 1 defense in the country, it didn't have that many sacks. So being able to have the defensive front that Ole Miss has with Jared Ivey, J.J. Pegues, Walter Nolan, Prince Le'Mami Suntarine Perkins, it's as good a defense as anybody in the country. There could be an argument to be made that maybe Indiana has a better defense. I'm not sure they do. I think this Ole Miss defense may have the best defense in the country. And you look at how good they were last week against Arkansas, limiting the quarterback, limiting the running back. Arkansas couldn't do anything on the ground. And then we fast forward to Georgia and how well they did by creating turnovers, interceptions, fumbles. It was a big day for Ole Miss defensively the last couple of weeks.
Well, moving on to the Ole Miss 28-10 win over Georgia. They gave up a short field after their own interception of 21 yards, fall behind early 7-0. They only give up 3 points from there on out.
Yeah, outscored Georgia 28-3. And that's a testament to Lane Kiffin. That's a testament to Jaxson Dart and Charlie Weiss in the offense. Oddly enough, Frank, they had a very difficult time running the football, and that's something they'll need to address over the next couple of weeks. Now, a lot of that has to do with that Georgia defensive front is one of the better defensive fronts that Ole Miss has faced, not named Kentucky. But they were able to throw the ball down the field, and I thought it was a really big day for Caden Lee, the wide receiver for Ole Miss, and Jordan Watkins had a big day. But Daquan Wright is playing well. But quite frankly, Jaxson Dart's playing at the Heisman caliber level. We thought he was going to play coming into the season. Had a really big game. He's leading this offense on and off the field. But the key component for Ole Miss right now for being so successful on offense is that offensive line. They've got a cohesive unit now. They're developing a pocket for Jaxson Dart. The last 2 games, Frank, I think Jaxson Dart's been sacked once, and that was his fault, according to head coach Lane Kiffin. He said he did not go through his progressions properly. That's why he was sacked. So the offensive front's giving Ole Miss and Jaxson Dart a great opportunity to succeed.
Georgia, number 3 coming in. Mm-hmm. Biggest defeat for the Ole Miss Rebels at home. Lots of fines afterwards. Big party afterwards. I enjoyed watching the linebackers in that game. How they moved well and covered each other's. When one would go up, one would be kind of behind.
Well, you got T.J. Daugherty, who is the quarterback on the defense. He's got the in-helmet communication to defensive coordinator Pete Golding. Pooh, Frank, I think, is the best linebacker in the Southeastern Conference. Sideline to sideline, there's no one any better. He is a gamer. He is very physical. And the most important part of his game is once he gets a hold of the offensive player, he's taking them to the ground. it's fun to watch him play because you watch his vision. And having a really good defensive front makes the linebackers a lot better. But Poole, to me, is just like you say, is one of the better linebackers in the country. And he's leads the team in tackles. And this team is just rock solid top to bottom. Defensively, we've seen the secondary, basically Trey Washington on the left boundary, play much better.
Yeah, he had a great game.
He did. And, it's been Trey Amos has been the lockdown corner to the right, the transfer out of Alabama. But Trey Washington had a really big game against Georgia and really locked down those receivers for Georgia. You
were in the locker room afterwards. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's the biggest game since probably 1958. And that's saying a lot. We talk about Ole Miss, and you and I have talked about this both on air and off air. You look back in the history of Ole Miss football, and a lot of the big games that Ole Miss has played, 03, LSU, 14, Arkansas, 92, Alabama, 90, Tennessee.
Tennessee and Memphis.
Yeah.
I'm still
Do you know the common component in all those games? Ole Miss lost them. So Ole Miss has historically not won the big game, specifically at home. And they did something they haven't done in a while. That's win a big game. And not only win a big game, they won the biggest game. Now, if they lose against Florida in a week from Saturday and lose against Mississippi State, none of this matters. So we'll know at the end of the year just how big the game was. And we'll talk about college football playoff. But where they fell after beating Georgia, right now, biggest game in the history of Ole Miss football, and they win the game. And it was a big day for Ole Miss fans, and they had every reason to celebrate.
It was a lot of fun, and you've mentioned some teams as we go toward. We're gonna take a break, but as we get there, you talked about we're gonna talk about scenarios. You've mentioned Indiana, you've mentioned Texas already. Teams that just haven't really played anybody.
Well, you have a combination of Indiana, Penn State, and Texas. Those three teams are in the college football playoff top 12 poll.
Top of the top 12.
Yeah. Between those three, they've had 0 top 25 wins currently.
Exactly.
That tells you all you need to know about strength of schedule. And I think that will play a factor. The good news, I think, for Ole Miss is every team above them is not going to stay there. They're going to lose. The question is, when they lose, how far do they fall? Do they push Ole Miss out of the top 12? Because Ole Miss may not have an opportunity to move up on their own. They may have to have some help.
Let's take a break. We're going to come back right on that thought, and that's where we'll pick up with headline number 2 on Magnolia Fields, episode number 32. We'll be back after this.
If you've been hurt in a car wreck, you know who to call. Call me. Remember, one call, that's all.
Welcome to the Richard Schwartz and Associates Magnolia Field Studios. One call, that's all.
Once again, welcome back into the Richard Schwartz and Associates studio. Brad, Logan, Frank Dodds with you, and we were just going to headline number 2. Last 2 games. Is it enough? What are the CFP scenarios?
Right now, I think it's enough. And one thing I think Ole Miss has playing in its favor is they have beaten one of the best teams in college football. And Ole Miss, honestly, you could make an argument that we'll talk about Georgia, Tennessee in a moment, but there could be an argument to be made that Ole Miss needs Tennessee actually to beat Georgia and knock them out. I think there's an argument to be made that Ole Miss needs Georgia to continue to win, so it makes that win look better. So I kind of lean that way. But I think they've done enough. And the good news, I think, for Ole Miss is if you lose early, you win late. And I think, honestly, losing Kentucky and beating Georgia is a better scenario than beating Kentucky and losing to Georgia, because I think that helps Ole Miss by winning later on in the season. So all of a sudden you'll see Ole Miss go on a 5-game win streak. I think that's much better in the playoff, the committee's mind, than it would be if you were to lose late.
Has Kiffin really addressed any of this, or is he just business mode? We've got to win.
Monday, this past Monday, prior to the Georgia game, he did make mention that they discussed the college football playoff as a team because he said, gentlemen, we have been playing in the college football playoff for the last couple of weeks. Our playoff started when we lost to LSU, and I'm talking and speaking of Kiffin. And so they've been in the college football playoff theoretically since LSU, and they have played like a playoff team. And I think, Frank, they played like a playoff team since South Carolina. I think they played like a playoff team against LSU. They just couldn't score in the red zone. I think defensively they played well enough to win the game. LSU never led in regulation.
I agree. The defense played well enough to win both Kentucky and LSU.
They did.
And that South you referenced it. That South Carolina win
looks good
at
now.
South Carolina. Yeah, looks pretty good.
And that wasn't a field goal late in the game to win. That was a absolute bloodletting in Columbia
at night.
Yes, it ended at night, starting in the afternoon. But it was a game in which Ole Miss just absolutely dominated South Carolina. And people are saying now that South Carolina is the best 3-loss team in the country, whatever that gets you, the cup of coffee down the street. But Carolina is playing as good as anybody in the country, and they've got Missouri this weekend. It's so weird, Frank. Carolina's a 3-loss team. Missouri is a 1 or 2-loss team, and it's like a 14-point spread for Carolina.
Yeah. Missouri hasn't really played well. Should have lost 2 more.
Right.
And so we'll go right back to what you just said, because this weekend is Florida, Tennessee.
Mm-hmm. Georgia,
Tennessee. I mean, Georgia, Tennessee. I got Florida on the mind because that's the next.
Yeah.
Georgia, Tennessee, which was one of Franco's Fab 15 before the season started. The game that we had to know what that outcome was.
And you nailed it because it is very important.
I'm with you. I like Georgia to eliminate Tennessee. And here, what's this based on? Tuesday's CFP release. They lowered Tennessee, who had just won by 15. And they elevated Indiana, who struggled against 5-loss Michigan, and BYU, who probably should not have won that game against Utah, above them. I think that was the setup. I think that was the indication that they're looking for Georgia to beat Tennessee, and we now have Tennessee low enough at 7 to get rid of them completely, to bury them down at 14 or 15 if Georgia wins that game. Then Georgia quite possibly leapfrogs Ole Miss, but brings Ole Miss up a couple notches with them.
I can see that happen. And I will add to that. Ward Manuel, the chair of the college football playoff, gave a reason why Indiana jumped Tennessee. And I still, to this day, don't know what he was talking about.
No.
It didn't make no sense. And, there have been college football media that cover the sport, specifically Tennessee, and they've said, we have no idea what he was talking about. I think your rationalization or your answer there, I think that's exactly what
I think that's why Tennessee got lowered.
Do you think it helps Ole Miss if Georgia wins or Tennessee wins?
Georgia.
I agree.
I think they lowered Tennessee so that they can bury them after they lose to Georgia, bring up Georgia, and bring up Ole Miss 1 or 2 slots with them. Georgia may leapfrog Ole Miss.
Yes.
I don't know that I'm not okay with that.
My thoughts are I think Lane Kiffin is a media darling, and that's good for Ole Miss. I think they would love an Ole Miss Colorado matchup. They would love for Colorado to win the Big 12 so they could get Deion in the college football playoff because of the numbers that he brings to the table. And I think matching Colorado up against Ole Miss would be just chum in the water for executives. I think that would generate a lot of eyeballs. And I think that's good for Ole Miss that Lane Kiffin is the head coach down the road.
You brought it up. Where is Deion Sanders coaching next year?
Well, I mean, there have been a lot of discussions from national media that Deion may bolt for Florida State.
Florida State, where he won a Heisman Trophy.
If they move on from
from Mike Norvell.
Mike Norvell. So could be.
They've had a miserable year.
Yeah. It's been a long year. He relieved his coordinators this week. Mm-hmm. So it is not a good situation for Florida State. They'll host, I don't know if it's on the road or at home, but they'll play Florida at the end of the year. Florida, we've not mentioned this yet, they have LSU on Saturday.
They have
a very upset
Florida
LSU team.
Yeah, Florida and LSU this weekend. So no break for the Gators. and then Ole Miss on a bye.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ole Miss goes down there for an 11 o'clock kickoff in a week and a half.
Yep, and we have not visited with everyone since Director of Athletics Scott Strickland has publicly endorsed that Billy Napier will return for another year as Florida head coach.
Do you believe him?
Yes, because I think it's basically saying I'm the athletic director and I am in major trouble.
And I've got to hang my hat on
I've got to
this.
hang my hat on him, so I want him to come back because I want a job. You know, Al Golden, is it Al, the basketball coach? Long story short, he is in a big, big issue right now, and we don't know if he'll be the basketball coach moving forward because there is a situation involving him. So it is not a good situation with the Florida Athletic Department right now.
No, Scott Strickland has not had a run at Florida this year that's gonna keep him in that position. Let's talk a little bit about the
Todd Golden. Go ahead.
Let's talk a little bit about the Florida game. Ole Miss going to Florida. Florida coming in this weekend is 2-4 in the SEC, 4-5 overall. 10th in scoring offense, 15th in scoring defense. We don't know if DJ Lagway is playing.
Right.
We'll find out this weekend against LSU. But this is a team that was in trouble coming into the season.
They look really bad early. They look better as the season has gone on. They actually played well enough. If they don't fumble the ball away or throw the pick or turn the ball over, I think they possibly could have beaten Georgia. They were playing well enough to win the game. We've seen them had a pulse a little bit over the last couple of weeks, so I expect them to give LSU a little bit of a game. If LSU goes down there this weekend and just absolutely just boat races Florida, that's good news for Ole Miss, I think. But if Ole Miss plays like they've been playing the last couple of weeks, they should have no problem with Florida.
The headline here is fast start required.
Just like Arkansas.
Just like Arkansas.
Put them out of the game. And
it's early. The crowd's not into it. They're late arriving. The same things that kind of bit Ole Miss against Kentucky.
Yes, very much so.
But you got to get off that fast start. You can't squander it like you did at LSU.
Right. And you got to score in the red zone. Now, Ole Miss got off to a fast start against LSU, but they could not score in the red zone, and that's what proved to be pivotal later on in the game.
Did you appreciate Kiffin kicking 5 field goals against Georgia?
Well, I think that just goes to show you that Lane Kiffin's made mention that this is a different team.
I have a defense.
He's even admitted
I can win with field goals now.
He said, we're a defensive team, believe it or not. Even as good as Jaxson Dart has been and the receivers have been, being a defensive team allows you to punt. It allows you to kick field goals, especially when you have someone like Cade Davis, who the 50-some-odd yard kick would have been good from 75 yards. It went over the upright. So he's been phenomenal, and having that in your arsenal has been very beneficial for Ole Miss.
Well, having that defense.
Yeah.
And you want them to get off to a fast start against Florida, too. Just don't let that crowd get into it. Both offensively,
right,
get the points. Defensively, don't let the crowd into it. That's the recipe we called for. It
Arkansas,
worked at Arkansas.
It worked perfectly.
Worked perfectly. And they need it again on the road because defense travels. Their running game is not there, but defense travels.
Yeah.
So let's go to headline number. Tell you what. We'll go to headline number 4. Other games, what to watch from Franco's Fab 15. We've referenced it. We won't be back in until almost 2 weeks. We referenced the big Georgia-Tennessee game this weekend. Anything else on that next week? Really, just nothing was circled before the season. Looking down the road, one of my problems with the CFP selection is taking away my interest from some games. I mean, there's some nice games on here the next 2 weekends, but are they going to impact the CFP? I think we're waiting for Indiana and Ohio State, Georgia, Tennessee this weekend, Texas A&M the last weekend, as long as everything else holds serve.
What could absolutely be pure chaos, and no one's really talking about it right now, but they will soon, championship games for conferences.
Oh, because they're going to be horrible.
Well, the problem with those, for a college football playoff standpoint, they could absolutely bring a 2-loss team to a 3-loss team. There's an opportunity that Ole Miss goes 10-2 and backdoors their way into the conference championship game.
Do you know how many 10-2, 6-2 SEC teams there are going to be? Didn't we say that in August?
Yeah, there is a chance that LSU could be 9-3. and go to the college football playoff.
Absolutely, they could.
That would probably kick Ole Miss and
Or they could go to the
Tennessee.
SEC. They could go to the SEC championship.
That's what I'm saying. They would.
And then does that
win,
automatically make – well, yeah, if they win.
if they went and win, they're in the playoff. If they went and lose, they would not be. But if LSU were to win 9-3 in the conference and get to college football playoff, that's going to kick Ole Miss. Is probably kicking Tennessee out. So there's a lot that can happen over the next couple of weeks. But if you're Ole Miss, the important thing for Ole Miss, control your own path. Beat Florida, beat Mississippi State, and really hope some chaos ensues, and you can stay where you need to be.
Well, right now, if everything held serve, don't you think it's Texas, Alabama in the SEC championship?
Yes, I do. And I would want nothing to do with Alabama right now.
No, and neither one of them is probably going to get kicked out of that CFP.
No, they're solid.
So that opens the door for two more.
How many losses does Alabama have? Do they not have 2 losses?
Are they both in conference? That's where it gets.
Yeah, that's where it gets tricky. What if Alabama gets their 3rd loss? Do they make it? Texas, the best case scenario for Ole Miss is Texas to win out. That would knock A&M out.
A&M out.
Alabama needs to win out. It wouldn't hurt.
I think Georgia needs to win out.
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt Ole Miss for Auburn to beat Alabama. That kicks them out. So that means it's probably you could have Texas A&M could have an impact.
Yeah.
Georgia could sneak their way back into the conference race if it wins out. It's just there's a lot of scenarios. And as I sit here and look, Alabama does have 2 losses. So that's why if Auburn beats Alabama, that would knock them out. Or if Alabama gets 3 losses in the conference championship, I don't think they're going to make the playoff.
And in an odd sort of way, for the first time in my life, I'm rooting for Army. I'm a Navy graduate, but Army, if they beat Notre Dame, that opens up a spot. They're out after losing to NIU.
Right. I don't think Notre Dame could keep their spot with 2 losses to Army and then, of course, Northern Illinois.
So let's take a break. We'll be back with our final segment here on Magnolia Fields, episode 32, the Hotty Toddy edition. We'll be back right after this on the Max Out Sports Network.
If you've been hurt in a car wreck, you know who to call. Call me. Remember, 1 call, that's all.
Welcome back to the Magnolia Field Studios, brought to you by Richard Schwartz and Associates. 1 call, that's all.
Once again, welcome back to Magnolia Fields, episode 32, the Hotty Toddy edition on Richard Schwartz and Associates studio. You know, somebody asked me after Saturday's game against Georgia, did we see Richard Schwartz and Associates during that game? I don't remember a single review of a play.
I don't know if it was. And it's funny you say that. The crew received very high marks. There was not a lot of penalties, and that's a lot of the reason. And I think, oddly enough, anytime in the SEC when you have a big game, the penalties go down. I would love to see how many fouls Tennessee, Mississippi State had versus Ole Miss and Georgia, because I think that has a lot to do with how big of a game it is. But, yeah, that's a good point. I don't know that we had any reviews. It was a really good game by the officiating crew.
And Kirby Smart was quite complimentary.
Yeah. Talked about the environment, about, you know, how good of a job Lane Kiffin has done, and really was very complimentary of the Ole Miss fans and the environment. They made a difference. I've seen a couple of videos to where, Carson Beck was at the line of scrimmage and, couldn't communicate. Couldn't communicate with his lineman. That's a rare occurrence inside Walt Hemingway.
Mm-hmm. They I don't remember where I was going to go with that thought, but
that says a lot coming from Kirby Smart, though.
Well, that's what I was going to say. He has a vested interest in saying that Ole Miss is a really good team.
Yeah, he does.
Because now he's just lost to them, and he needs them to win out.
Right.
Don't you think?
I think there's a lot of truth to that, because the more Ole Miss wins, the more it helps him. And, they're a really good team. I don't think people need to underestimate the fact that Ole Miss beat a really good football team. And it wasn't to where they found a way around it like, I think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors with 14 and 15 with Ole Miss and Alabama about beating Nick Saban. There was no smoke and mirrors. Ole Miss lined up and physically dominated Georgia. That's never happened at Ole Miss. It's a big deal.
Yeah, and they have the athletes, and they knew that coming into the season. So let's go to headline number 5, as we've got a little bit less than 5 minutes remaining with you here on the Magnolia Fields Podcast, Hotty Toddy Edition, episode 32. Basketball off to a pretty good start. I got so caught up in that women's game from Paris.
Yeah, they played so well against USC, and I had a chance to visit with Coach Yo at the on the sideline of the Georgia game, and she was so complimentary of her team. She's so excited about KK Deans. If you remember, Deans was a transfer that came in and tore her knee early in the season last year. So she loves her roster, and Frank, there's a name that a lot of people are going to remember, and it's one of the higher prospects, one of the top players in the country. Lauren Jacobs. And Yo went into South Carolina and got that.
Went where?
Went into Columbia, South Carolina, and got her out from under Dawn Staley. And that was a heck of a coup by Ole Miss. This is a really good roster for Coach Yo, and I'm excited to see what they can do this year.
The men are off to a 3-0 start. Big game a couple nights ago in the Tad Pad. Sean Padula.
Huge, 27
Virginia
points.
Tech transfer.
Yeah. Really good. And Matthew Morrell dealing with a little bit of a nagging injury. He did not play, but Coach Chris Beard said that he will be available. It's Saturday's game. I think Saturday's the next game is Saturday when they play Colorado State in South Haven. So it's a great opportunity to head up around the Memphis area. I know Coach Beard's really excited about showcasing the team. It's one to where I know a lot of people watching and a lot of people listening. It's hard to flip the switch when you have a really good football team. And what I mean by that is it's hard to really get vested into basketball whenever things are going so well on the football field. So that will start really turning the page after the Egg Bowl. People will start coming and understanding that Ole Miss's basketball teams, men and women, will start playing much better teams, and you'll start following a little bit more. But
yeah, and
it's a really good roster.
Thing.
It is. It's a great roster, and Coach Beard's done a great job so far. And Padula, Morrell, there's a lot of talent on this team. Malik Dia has been playing well, so there's a lot of talent on this team.
The last thoughts, last couple minutes we have here together. Ole Miss takes care of business at Florida, and then we'll be back in the studio, but the Egg Bowl, never give me. If they take care of business, what's the final outcome? Right now, they would be projected to play a play-in game at Penn State.
Right now, yes. I think Ole Miss is going to be at least a 17-point favorite in Gainesville next Saturday. I think they'll be anywhere from a 27 to a 30-point favorite against Mississippi State. Look, I understand it's a rivalry game, and throw the record books out, but not this year. There's more separation between Ole Miss and Mississippi State football than it's ever been. And until Mississippi State decides it wants to play football in the SEC and step up to the plate, they're going to continue to be at the bottom of the SEC. They've got to make some decisions internally about if they want to play football or not. And I expect Ole Miss to win the next two, and I think they're in the playoff. I do. I think that Georgia wins this weekend, and I think that's going to push Tennessee out. I agree with your synopsis there, and I think they've got a good chance.
Any chance remaining, though, that Ole Miss gets to host that first-round game?
Absolutely. I think they need to get to an 8 seed, and they need Indiana to lose twice. They need Indiana to lose in the conference championship game and the regular season. They need Ohio State to continue to win out. It wouldn't hurt for Penn State to lose. It wouldn't hurt for Alabama to get knocked down a peg.
Penn State's only played one game, and they lost it. A pretty good game. But.
Right. So Penn State, they're probably going to be there just by the process of elimination. But there's an opportunity to move up a couple of spots, and Ole Miss needs things to fall perfectly. But yeah, if they host a playoff game in Oxford, could you imagine Notre Dame coming to Oxford for a playoff game?
That's the other scenario we've seen since last summer. Again, I'm kind of rooting for Notre Dame to lose. Let's get rid of them. Yeah. I think that helps Ole Miss move up.
It does. I was just using Notre Dame as an example. Indiana coming to Oxford.
Oxford,
SMU.
Ole Miss going to Indiana.
Ole Miss going to Indiana, yeah. There are a lot of different scenarios, but Ole Miss, as long as you get in the top 12, you just roll the dice and play.
Thank you for tuning in. Episode 32, Magnolia Fields podcast from the Richard Schwartz and Associates studio. Until next time.